Hello everyone. Welcome to this episode of Novelists Unwind. It's our first episode of the year, and I'm really excited to have Rita Gerlach with me. This is going to be a little bit of a strange video, so bear with us. We're going to be talking about Homefront Heroines, which just released this month, and I want to talk to Rita about her story, but here's what happened. The other two authors, Lauralee Bliss and Amanda Barratt, and I were able to get on Zoom, and Rita was having some technical difficulties. So we went ahead and did our recording and talked about our stories. And then Rita was able to get on after that recording was done. So what I've decided to do is now Rita and I are together. We're going to talk about her story. And then this video will also include the recording I did with Amanda and Lauralee, and you will hear me say on that, Rita can't join us because she has technical difficulties, but Rita has joined us now, so just ignore that when you listen to that part of the interview. So we're really excited to talk about Hometown Heroines, and we're going to give this time completely to Rita, since we've talked about the other stories, and you'll be hearing about those as the video continues. Yes. So, Rita, we really, and we talk about this later on in the video too, we are so thankful, Lauralee, Amanda, and I, that you brought this group together, because this was your brainchild. This was something you really wanted to do. So could you just at first tell us why a World War II collection on the Homefront Heroines, why that was so important to you?
Well, it was for several reasons, and I thought about this morning. I knew you were going to ask me that question. Like, because people do. They say,
Yeah.
"What made you come up with that idea?" Right? Well, I think it was several different things kind of prompted it. I had already written. I was contracted with 4 novellas, and a good friend of mine, author Rachel Mueller, or Mueller, I think is how you pronounce it. She wrote a series, a World War II series that I read, and I thought it was great, and she's my group. And of course, we got to talking about this era a little bit, and my parents both, in World War II, and I don't know, it just kind of was like a little seed was planted there, and it kind of started growing. And I started looking at stuff, and then I asked around, the authors, would anybody want to do this? And it was interesting because at the time, Barbour was doing like 8 to 9, or between I guess 7 to 9 authors on a book, and then they cut it down to 4 authors per book. And initially, the proposal was for, I think, 7 of us. So what I did is I went and I changed the proposal to a 2-part proposal. So if anybody at Barbour's listening, we're hoping that the second proposal gets accepted too. And I think with Homefront Heroines, I'm hearing from a lot of people saying they treat it, they love this era. Yeah. It's a little bit different from a lot of stuff that's out. And I guess that's what I wanted to do. I think I wanted to just come up with an of a different time period than, we see a lot of Regency, we see a lot of Amish, we see, a lot of Edwardian and stuff like that. So I kind of took a risk, I guess, sending that in with, that era of World War II, but
I'm glad you did.
and you ladies have been just so great. I feel so honored and privileged to be a part of this collection with the 3 of you.
Oh, thank you. Me too. I mean, it really is. It's a very special collection. I think all of us love that World War II era. Amanda has written, a World War II novel. I have. I'm not sure Lauralee has, but it's just a fun. Well, and it's not fun. I mean, it's very tragic in lots of ways. But there are so many stories, and there's stories of courage and of hope, and they're there. One thing.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say that You know, if you go in a bookstore and you're looking at World War II fiction, a lot of it has to do with war.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so
Yeah.
with us doing Homefront Heroines, we wanted to bring to readers an opportunity to read about the women on the home front,
Yes.
you know, and a lot of you know, grandmothers, our mothers, our aunts, a lot of our families were a part of that, and I think that's what made it exciting too.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, so it's kind of like bringing all that, the Rosie the Riveters and the Wendy the Welders, bringing them all to the forefront a little bit. It was
Absolutely.
a romantic era too,
Yes. Yes.
wasn't it?
Yes.
Oh
Yes.
yeah.
It definitely was. Definitely was. Well, and you've written about your own personal connections. You have the website, the Facebook group, and I mentioned it later on too, and could not remember the name. I felt really bad that I did not look it up ahead of time, so I'd make sure it was in my head. But the Facebook group is inspirational.
Inspirational readers. Wait a minute.
See,
Now
yeah,
you caught me.
I know we're both bad about this,
um,
but I'm going to put it in the post, so it will
I
be in
think
the
it's
post.
inspirational readers of historical fiction homefront heroines
Yeah,
or inspirational readers homefront heroines fan page is
yeah.
what I'm putting.
Okay.
So if people just put in homefront heroines
They should
fan
be able to find
page,
it.
they'll find it. Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's been really fun, hasn't it?
Yes, yeah, yeah. I'm anxious to contribute more to that because I've got pictures I can post on there as well.
Oh
But,
yes.
but in that, you have posted about your own family and
Mhm.
and your connection with the Navy. So can you just talk about that for a couple minutes, and then we'll
Oh,
go
I'd love to.
backstory. Yeah.
Sure. Well, my son is in the Navy, and when he went in, I started looking at a lot of our, like, who in the family was in the Navy. You know, now I knew my dad. You know, my dad was a Navy guy, but we kind of have a long history. Um, it goes back as far as with Commodore Stephen Decatur. He was a naval hero during 1912 and the Barbary Pirates War, and he's on my dad's side. My cousin has, on his side, and my father, you know, he entered into World War II.
Hmm.
He was a little guy, and he tried the army. They wouldn't take him. Then he tried the Marines. Nope, too small, too little, too short, whatever. I used to call him Peanut in high school. That's how small. Little guy. And so nobody would take him. So he went home and he made a pair of barbells out of coffee cans.
Oh
Filled
wow.
the coffee cans with concrete, put the bar in it, and he started lifting weights and eating steaks and, so he bulked himself up and the Navy took him.
Wow.
So he was on the USS Vulcan. He was a petty officer and a machinist, and they were what they would do is his ship, they followed the fleet, and if there was like a battle and a ship was damaged, they'd come alongside, they'd repair the damage, and they
Oh
saved
wow.
lives too.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, my dad was a Navy guy, and so World War II and also Korea. Now my mother to me, you know, they never talked about this stuff when I was a kid. It was later on I found out all these things, you know.
Right.
She worked at the Naval Yard in Washington, D.C. She grew crystals for
I'm so
their
grew
crystals, these crystals,
Uh-huh.
and they would take them, cut them, and polish them. And they were used on submarines for sonar. I don't know exactly
Oh wow.
how all that works, but that's what she did. And she worked at the Navy Yard. At the same time, my dad was working at the Navy Yard, but they never met. But they did meet. Here's the romance part. They did meet at a New Year's Eve party in 1941. His boss who had a great name, this great name for a character in the book, Rebel Slater.
That is a
And
good
his,
name.
yeah, Rebel Slater. So I love all these 40s names. So his boss invited my dad to a New Year's Eve party that his daughter was giving. So my dad went, and he went with his friend, Lonnie Constantino. And they walked into this party, and he saw my mother across the room. And he said to his buddy, "You see that girl over there? I'm going to marry that girl." And Lonnie said, "Oh, come on, you don't even know that girl." He goes, "I'm going to know her after tonight, and I'm going to marry her." And you know what? She did go home with him and Lonnie in Lonnie's car that had no windshield and nothing, no top, and it was snowing. And he said it was great. It was great, he said, because he kept her warm in the back seat. So yeah, so he went into the war, and then after the war, they were married in 1947 and ended up having 6 children.
Wow.
So my mother, she was one of the Homefront heroines working at the Naval Yard.
Yeah. So is that what your story is? Did you sort of use any of that in your story, this family background?
Well, my heroine works at the Naval Yard in Washington. And what she does is she's a light welder. They did all these little parts. And I loved the fact that I did make mention of my grandmother and mother and my dad in the prose of the story, where there's a scene where the group of women that all work together, they're on their lunch break talking about their guys, and one woman says, I wish I should have the book here. She says, yeah, Rose Robertson is really worried about her brothers, and her mother is worried. Because 2 of them, they haven't, I think this is what I wrote, that they hadn't heard from them, or that they are POWs. And Rose hasn't heard from her guy who's on the USS Vulcan, right? And that did happen.
That's cool.
That's a whole nother story, which we probably don't have time for me to tell.
I wish we did, but no, because
I know. So yeah, I was able to make mention of them, and then I also had I mentioned V-mail in the story. And when I was working with the editor Barbour, we were talking about it, and I said, well, let me send you something. I sent her a scanned picture of a piece of V-mail. It's so big, like, I don't know, 4x5, and sent it to her, and it's a piece of email sent from my grandmother to my father in August of 1943, and it's a little poem she wrote to him, and the people would use these V-mails to note to their sailor, to their soldier, and it would go to the war office. They knew where they were, and then they could send this stuff out. And so she thought it was so cool that she showed it to Rebecca Germany, and then they decided to include it in the story, with my author notes. So when I saw that, when I got the books and I saw that, I was like, wow, and I thought, my grandmother had no idea that her little piece of email that I saved from being thrown away would be in her granddaughter's story in a book. It just, so yeah, there's these connections. And when my mother was working at the Naval Yard, I like to say she saved President Truman's life. Yeah, because she was working in her space, and they had this machine that would grow these crystals.
I'm sorry.
And he came in on a tour. Okay. Right? And of course he had, the Secret Service guys with him and everything. And she was explaining to him what she did, and he went to touch the machine, and she pushed him out of the way. And he was like, the Secret Service are like coming around her, and then he's like, why did you do that? And she said, Mr. President, you would have been electrocuted.
Oh my gosh.
So when she told me that story, I said, so you saved the president's life?
Yeah. Wow.
She's like, oh, no.
Yeah.
And I had an aunt. I had an aunt that worked at the FBI during the war. She came down from a farm in Pennsylvania, and she worked at the FBI. And I didn't know that
You've
till
got
like 2
tons
years
of
ago.
stories. I mean, you could write a whole novella collection yourself, I think, on your family
Well,
stories.
maybe. I mean, I put stuff in Moonlight Serenade with all that,
Yeah.
and I dedicated it to my parents and to my son,
Yeah.
who is a petty officer in the United States Navy right now, and married, and very proud of
And you're
him.
proud of him. Well, that's also
And
delightful. I think I could just keep talking to you forever, but I
I know.
can't because we've got, the whole other, yeah. So
That's
everybody
Rita.
stay tuned because next following this will be Amanda and Lauralee. But I do ask everybody before I let them go,
Yes.
when you hit the end, you're all done writing your novel. What do you do to unwind?
What do I do to unwind? Eat
Yes.
a ton of chocolate. No.
Oh yeah, that's a good answer.
No,
That's a good answer.
No, to unwind. What do I? Well, I guess I don't really feel like I need to unwind.
Oh, that's cool. Good.
After writing, the end of the story, there's this joy of, finishing it.
Yes.
And I just go on to writing the next thing. There was 2 novels I was working on that I kind of had to put in the wings while I was working on these novellas for Barbour. So I'm back to that, but to unwind, I don't know.
You just start the next project, huh?
Next project, or I watch an old movie.
Yeah, that's a good thing to do.
Unwinding is usually in the evening when everything is done.
Everything's done. Well, Rita, thank you so much. And
Oh, thanks. I'm sorry to be so chatty.
oh, you know what? Honestly, if we had unlimited time, I love hearing your stories. But thank you for sharing them in the Facebook group too, and for this fun guest. So thank you, and thanks everybody. But
thank you.
This video is going to continue. My time with Rita is going to come to an end, but Lauralee and Amanda Barratt will be.
And thanks to you, Johnnie, for doing this.
Oh, I love it.
And Amanda and Lauralee.
Yes.
And to all of our readers.
Yes.
They won't be disappointed.
No, these are really great stories. I'm proud of all of them. So
they are.
Thank you.
A lot of fun. Okay.
Hang in, everybody. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Novelists Unwind. I'm Johnnie Alexander, and this is our first interview of the year. And I'm very excited to have joining me Lauralee Bliss and Amanda Barratt. We're also hoping that Rita Gerlach is going to be joining us in a few minutes. We'll see. We're really excited because this is our book. We all have a story in this, Homefront Heroines. It's about women serving the home front, the United States, during World War II. So we're going to talk about each of our stories. This is a great collection. One of the fun things about it is that each of the titles is a song title from that era. And I know that when I picked my title, that was what then opened up the story for me. So it was like the song came first and then the story. So I'm kind of interested to see how it was with everybody else. So we're just kind of going to go start out with talking to Lauralee. Her story is called Only Forever. It takes place in 1943 in Springville, New York. And this is the little tagline. Marilyn and Arthur learned the hard way that it's not the outside that matters, but the inward working of the heart that is precious to God and each other. So Lauralee, welcome, and tell us a little bit about the inspiration behind Only Forever and about your story, please.
Well, I'm so thrilled to be here. I'll tell you, this story is near and dear to my heart, not only because I happen to be a gardener, which is part of this is, of course, the Victory Garden, but because also near here my grandmother grew up. And I heard a lot of stories back in war times from my dad and my mom. and like that. So bringing this part of Western New York to life in this story meant a lot to me too. So not only that, but of course gardening, which I think growing things brings us closer to God in his creation. And I'm a big outdoor fan, so I love that too. But anyway, so it was great bringing Marilyn and art to life. As far as Marilyn just being so distraught with sending her brother to war and wanting what she could do, feeling helpless, and then having this great idea for the Victory Garden, but finding out there could be other things at play, and I don't want to give my story away too much, but other things at play that really require, you know, the insight of God and really the help of others, especially her childhood friend Art. So I really enjoyed doing this. It was a wonderful tale to tell, and really to me speaks just about the heart and soul, not only of just the community, but just people, just people coming together in times of hardship. So
how did the song title interweave itself with your story?
Well, I'll tell you, it was you wonderful ladies that came up with the title for me. You know, I wasn't sure which to use, and then suddenly, like, you know, Johnnie, what you said, it kind of opened up the idea that even, you know, those people that God has put into our hearts and our lives from long ago can still, you know, be a force, you know, many years later. And there's where you become that only forever part, that there are instances in our lives that God will bring those things and those people into us and realize that that is what lasts. And that's, you know, the idea, hey, you know, especially when things get hard, you know, we hold on to each other and hold on to those things he's brought into our lives, even if it may be a long time ago. So.
Oh, cool. That's really cool. Well, that's fun. And I like the whole idea of the Victory Gardens too, because that was such an integral part of what we could do here when the fighting was all fortunately was taking place, you know, far, far away. Can you tell us something about the Victory Gardens, you know, about how they worked and about, I don't know, just anything that you learned in your research that would be fun about them?
Sure. Well, of course, with the war effort came, you know, rationing, you know, and suddenly goods were disappearing from the shelves and like that. So there was kind of this movement to say, hey, why don't we help out and each family start a garden plot and start growing vegetables, you know, not only to help because there's rationing, but also to be useful, as Marilyn did, you know, with the boys, you know, because her brother loved good pumpkin bread and pumpkin pie, and he was going to help, you know. So the Victory Garden just, again, was just something that folks held on to help move them into the idea of, hey, we're in all this together, you know, all of us, the men and women that are called, and then us here on the home front, you know, called to do this great work so that we can all, you know, share in this effort. It's not just one person or another, but all of us together. So, I mean, and I love growing anyway. I have a garden every year. I've had one for 20 years now. And I just think working the ground and seeing those little seeds, and, you know, the Bible talks about the mustard seed growing and just, you know, the seed of faith, and just seeing those seeds that we plant and waiting earnestly for them to come forth, you know, to me is just nothing more, you know, biblical than having that garden. So I just really said, this is a story that needs to be told, and I'm just really happy that I could tell it.
I don't have a green thumb, but when you start talking about that, a garden's being biblical, it's like, maybe I should have a garden. Do you have a garden, Amanda? Do you garden?
I used to, not so much anymore, but I did used to, and I did enjoy it. It was really nice to see things, you know, to eat the things that then you were, you know, working to grow. So that was really nice.
And my parents always had one. I grew up on a farm, of course, so we had the vegetable garden, and I would go out and, you know, pull carrots, pull the lettuce, the radishes and all that. So that was fun. But I had two much younger siblings, and my job usually was to watch them while the gardening work was going on. So I never really got involved in it too much, and never really. I love gardens to see them when they're done. Beautiful. That's That's really great. Lauralee, thank you so much for sharing about that. That's fun to learn a little bit more about the Victory Gardens. So I'm going to move on to Amanda. Amanda's story takes place in 1945 in Palm Springs, California. It's called Dream a Little Dream. If I could sing, it's like I want to sing that title. You know what I mean? It's like you just hear it in your head. When an Army nurse and a former film star are reunited at a wartime hospital, can they move beyond their past and into a future together? So, wow, tell us a little bit more about your story.
So my story is about Cliff and Rosemary, and this story was inspired by so many things that I love. And Cliff was inspired by, he's a Marine Corps pilot. Well, he's a film star who becomes a Marine Corps pilot, and so he was inspired by the many Hollywood stars who donated and went into the war. And what I grew up watching with my dad, watching shows like Baba Black Sheep, films like Memphis Belle, and so I really grew up always fascinated by these pilots and these aviation heroes. And so I knew that I wanted to make him that, and I also wanted to tap into my love of classic films and actors like Clark Gable and Jimmy Stewart, you know, who they could have stayed in these safe careers in Hollywood, but they went there. And I am such a huge classic movie fan. And so that was just so fun, like, you know, to watch classic movies and call it research. And so, and then Rosemary was inspired by my love of nursing and just what women did back then, and that they maybe, though nurses weren't really, you know, they weren't fighting the battles and, you know, dropping the bombs and things like that, but they were doing this equally important work. And so I really enjoyed researching the history of nursing and reading, you know, testimonies of women who were nurses in various capacities, whether on the front lines or in hospitals like my heroine Rosemary is. And so I just loved kind of combining these things, and also combining, I've always loved Bob Hope radio shows. And so when I discovered that Bob Hope had done a show at the Veterans Hospital in Palm Springs, I knew that I wanted to tie that into my story. And because I'd listened to so many of his different recorded shows, and though they were funny, I love the ones where he really talked in depth, like the Christmas ones where he talked about, you know, that there are people, you know, we have to be praying for peace for our country. And he went totally from this really hilarious comedian to this really sincere man. And so I also really enjoyed learning about him and having him be a cameo character in my story.
Oh, that is really cool that you did that. I'm with you. I love classic movies. So yeah, to be able just to, like you said, to sit there and watch them and say, oh no, I'm not wasting my time, or just doing nothing. I am researching. What were a couple of the movies that you watched that just were the most fun?
Well, I really love. This isn't a World War II movie per se. It was made in the 30s, but it happened one night with Clark Gable.
Yes,
that's one of my favorite ones. And Bringing Up Baby with Katharine Hepburn. That's another really fun one. And so when I talked about my hero having this career in Hollywood, I knew that I wanted him to have kind of done some movies that were along those lines, you know, those comedy ones that, you know. And so that was just super fun to think about. And I even was able to, I have a scene in the book where the characters are quoted. He's doing when he's in the hospital recovering from his war injuries, he does a scene with one of the nurses from one of his movies. And so it was kind of fun to put myself in the head of a 1930s screenwriter and write that scene.
That is so fun. So you see, this collection just is wonderful. I mean, because it just brings all this stuff together, and it happens here. And I think that's really cool too, that there's stories that happen here in the United States. So Rita is having some little technical issues, so I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about my story. Blue Moon takes place in 1943 in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, which you may know is known as the Secret City, because that is where they were building the atomic bombs that eventually got doing research for that and building them, which were, of course, were the bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima. So mine is, after humiliating each other, a WWOOPS officer, and that is what they were called, WOOPS, it was Women of Public Safety. A WWOOPS officer and an Army intelligence agent team up to protect a top secret atomic bomb facility from sabotage. So as I was going through song titles and I may have been one of the last ones to pick mine because it seems like I was like, oh, I'll do that one, and someone else had already taken it, because originally there were like eight of us that were going to do this, and then Barbour, went to the fore in one collection. So I saw Blue Moon, and I had to, okay, when was it written, and you had to do that and listen to the lyrics to see how that was going to do, and then do research on dates and when was there a blue moon, and how could I tie all that together. And then I had always kind of been interested in the whole Secret City thing. There's a couple books written about that, which I had not read, but they had been on my to be read list. And then I was looking up just things about women in like the wax and the waves and all that, and came across these whoops officers. So just real quick, the story behind them is that men guarded the installations in Eastern Tennessee, the dams that were being built. There were a lot of, like the Alcoa aluminum factory was there, and that was really important to the war effort. And so there were these industries there. But the Tennessee Valley Authority would hire men to guard these installations, and then the men would be called up to go to war, or they would, go to war. And so they decided they would start hiring women. So they weren't necessarily military women because they worked for the Tennessee Valley Authority, but they were the only women's auxiliary group, I guess you might call them, that were given guns and were given training in judo, and they also worked with dogs. And I trained dogs as a kid, so I'm just kind of like, oh, well, yeah, I want my heroine's going to have a dog. so then it was like the night of the blue moon, and that just sort of put all the story together, where she and the guy, the Army intelligence agent, they knew each other, they were in love with each other, but something had happened in his life, so he had broken off all communication with her. And like Lauralee, I don't want to give away too much of my story, but he's there to test security, and she ends up throwing him with her judo moves. So he's humiliated by that, and she's humiliated that he's even there because he's supposed to be overseas and he hasn't written to her in a long time. So anyway, it's just then how they have to work together and how their relationship comes back together. So it was a great fun to write. So we've all got copies. Hold them up. Homefront Heroines. Tell you a little bit about the fourth story. Rita was going to join us. She's having some technical issues. Her story is called Moonlight Serenade, another wonderful 1940s era song. Takes place in 1941, Washington, D.C. And her little blurb is, when Kate St. Clair takes over a sailor's job at the Naval Yard in Washington, D.C., she is thrown into a romance she never expected. And we want to give Rita a lot of credit because she's the one that actually pulled this collection together. It was her idea. She asked for, some folks to join her in it, and it was just such a pleasure to do that, and so exciting to do that. She's also, she also has a Facebook group. Do you guys remember the name of the Facebook group? Inspirational. And we would love for you to join it, and I will put it on the post for the blog so you can see it. I don't remember the name of it right off the top of my head. But anyway, sharing a lot of information about World War II, a lot of pictures, a lot of stories. Rita's family was involved in different ways, and she shares those stories and talking about Homefront Heroines in our stories as well. So before I let you guys go, let me ask you what you're working on real quick. Lauralee, what's next for you?
I'm working on a book about the mountaineers that used to inhabit the lands before Shenandoah National Park. So I'm fine-tuning that and doing more research on that too. So, and I still hike. I do my nonfiction too on my hiking adventure series, so through Whitefire Publishing. So yeah, it's fun.
I love that. Shenandoah, that is such a beautiful, beautiful part of the country. My mom and I did the drive, on is it Skyline? Is that what it's called?
Yes.
And it took us like 12 hours to go 100 miles. because it's just beautiful. Well, you can't go very fast for one thing, but also just stopping and all. It was a lovely memory for me that we did that. I'm so glad that we did. And Amanda, what's next for you?
In 2020, in May 2020, I have another novel coming out with Kriegel Publications, and this one's called The White Rose Resists, and it's about German college students during World War II, based on a true story, and they resisted Hitler by distributing leaflets throughout Munich. And so my story weaves in the true story of Sophie Scholl with a couple of fictional characters, and just takes the reader through the journey of what those students did during the war, in their courage and conviction in the face of so much evil and darkness.
Yeah, that's a needed story, and it's important that her story is told for sure. So that's great. Looking forward to reading that. Well, ladies, thank you so much for being with me. One last question, of course, I always ask, and because this is the first interview I've done in a while, I almost forgot to ask it. But y'all should know, you've done this before. You should know what this is. So, Lauralee, when you're all done with the novel, you hit the end, what do you do to unwind?
I take a walk. There is nothing better.
Oh, that's a great idea. That's a great way to unwind. Amanda?
I usually take an evening and just treat myself to watching a good movie or TV show, because that just says, it's like I'm getting into another story besides the one that's been in my head for so long. So I always enjoy doing that.
Yeah, that's true, because they are, I mean, once those stories get in there, they are just, that's your life, right? I mean, I'm kind of balancing two stories right now, and believe me, it's not easy. And there's a third one that's like back there too, that I need to do the proposal for, and it's just like, oh. So anyway, yeah, it's nice to get those characters out of your head for a bit and do something different. So ladies, thanks again. I always love having you as my guest and appreciate it. Thanks to all of you who are watching. Please grab a copy, Homefront Heroines. We really appreciate it. I'm sure you love it, especially if you're a fan of World War II stories. And we'll see you next time on Novelists Unwind. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.